Join me as I sit down with author and former Special Forces operator Jeff Kirkham, co-founder of Mustang Medicine and Ready Man, as we discuss a wide variety of topics across health and wellness.
I did 28 years. I was a Green Beret. And then while I was there, I jumped ship and went over to a counter-terrorist unit. And so I was part of a counter-terrorist force. And for about 13 years, so I spent a ton of time in Iraq and Afghanistan, sold everything off and except for Ready Man, and went to nursing school. Getting into the cold water is a very difficult, stressful thing. It's exposure therapy. So how do I regulate my nervous system while I'm being in a stressful environment? Breathing, counting my fingers, not getting away from the distraction, because distraction is actually outside of the regulation of the system. It's a false regulation. Whereas you think about when I'm fighting the saber-toothed tiger, I get that tunnel vision, I get that focus, hyper-focus that's taking place. How do I convert that over to something that helps regulate the nervous system? Well, which is just hyper-focused meditation, right? That the samurai were doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And so it's applying these techniques along the way to say, okay, now how do we compile all of these, put them in a book so that we can then share them with other people so that they can regulate their nervous system too. And not some hokey hippie kind of way, but in a scientific, rooted in the literature way of like, no, this works because we can look at the brain and the scans and say, no, we know this works because of X, Y, and Z.
Jeff will be sharing his insights and tools from his time in service and his studies as a nurse practitioner to help people better regulate their nervous system and live a healthier life. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Before we get started, if you could hit the like, subscribe, or follow button on whichever platform you're consuming today's show. Jeff, thanks for joining the show today. Definitely look forward to our conversation. And just to kind of dive right in, I'm curious, what's top of mind for you right now? What are you most excited that you're working on at the moment?
Man, I think probably that's kind of a loaded question, right? I think the thing that excites me the most that I'm working on is I just got back from scout camp with my two boys. And so they've got a couple of pieces and parts of their merit badges to finish off from scout camp. And that's actually probably not the answer that you expected, but that's probably the thing that I'm working on the most right now is that with them. So that's what I'm most excited about. Probably more to what you were thinking about was I'm in the middle of my nurse practitioner program. So I'm continuing to develop my brain and my skills and all of that stuff. So, it's fascinating. I'm really excited about that and what that means. We opened up a clinic here. And so being able to get in there and help people on the physical. So you'll remember from Mustang Medicine, when we talk about the physical, psychological, and emotional aspect, it's really cool to be able to help with the physical side on the medicine side with, traditional modalities as well as non-traditional modalities there at the clinic. And then of course that always segues into the psychological and emotional that is right there with what we're doing on Mustang Medicine. So yeah, I mean, I'm that and about 10 other projects that I'm juggling at any given time.
Right. Yeah, I know. And just even thinking about this call, obviously I was familiar with Mustang Medicine and I knew you had written some books, and then to learn more about the Ready Team Up program you're working with, and now, kind of learn more about this nurse practitioner program. And so I guess just to kind of start with the nurse practitioner piece, what you like when you get that program going, like what's the long-term outlook for kind of the next step on these clinics and how you'd be working with individuals from a health standpoint?
So the next step, right? So I did a 30-week program that I'm getting ready to sit for the boards on. That's called the nurse coaching program. And nurse coaching, is really a holistic program. So we can look at the physical, the psychological, and the emotional aspects of of our clients that we can look at, and then help kind of funnel everything down. So we can look at your medications. We can't change your medications, but we can look at your medications and how they're interacting with supplements, as well as with diet, as well as with exercise. So that, because there may be some medications that you were prescribed, say for depression or something, that all of a sudden could be interfering, or some of the foods that you're eating or supplements that you're taking could be interfering with those medications, or you're trying to get off those medications because and now you're doing an exercise regime, and so you can lessen those to where you can essentially wean yourself off. And so, as a nurse coach, we can look at the past, but we primarily look at the present and how to get to the future. So very similar to the summit statement that you experienced in rewilding. And so ultimately, that's a big part of where we'll go with the nurse practitioner, where I'll go with the nurse practitioner, as well as with even some of the more traditional Western modalities that are leading to some of the non-traditional Western modalities, because we've had great success. I've had life-changing experiences with non-Western, East meets West type stuff that was absolutely life-changing for me, for my back, where I injured my lower back and broke that thing. And then just continuing to provide that to other people. So it's just continuing to expand the knowledge base to be able to help people in the physical, psychological, and emotional side.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot there that we could unpack that I think people could get a lot of benefit out of. And I mean, today, obviously, like, so disconnection in society, mental health crisis issues you alluded to in your comment earlier, depression, anxiety seem to be an ever growing problem that probably has a basis in a tons of things. But, I guess if we were to attack one pillar of that and kind of unpack it a little bit further, like, what do you think are some of the fundamental causes that are driving people towards disconnection and this huge rise in depression and anxiety that we're seeing across our society?
How do you narrow that down into one or two things? I'll phrase it kind of like this. Probably one of the single biggest things that we can do to impact our physical and psychological health, which then obviously trickles down to our social health, right, is diet and exercise. So there is a budding new section of psychiatry that's coming out. Robert Lustig, if you don't know who he is, Dr. Robert Lustig, he wrote Hacking of the American Mind. He wrote Sugar, the Bitter Truth. He wrote Metabolica. And now they're starting to talk about metabolic psychiatry, which is absolutely true. He's a doctor of endocrinology and how it affects the hormones and neurochemicals that are in our body, and all of that traces back to the truth of you are very much what you eat, and if you eat garbage, then it affects literally every aspect of your life, every aspect, the physical, the psychological, and the emotional that's on there. So back to your original question, like, one, if we could nail this down, and Robert Palmer, or excuse me, not Robert Palmer, the singer, Chris Palmer, Dr. Palmer, who wrote Brain Energy, is a fantastic book. Same thing. It all goes back to metabolic health and how it's affecting us physically, and in this case psychologically, because if we're inflamed because of the foods that we're eating, the artificial garbage that is being fed to us, it will have a detrimental effect on us at the neurological level, 100%. And so that's kind of a really simplified thing of what can we do. Diet and exercise, 100% is the first thing of where we can start to help things out. And you can argue keto or vegetarian or whatever, and that's great. If you can't read if the ingredient on the box, well, if it's in a box, you're already starting out, 5 paces behind home plate, right? But if you can't read the word on the label, then it's probably shouldn't be going in your mouth, and then you just, anything that's artificial, more and more, the literature is very, 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 very strong on this. And anybody that tells you, right, that they eat clean for a week and they feel amazing, and then we all fall back into Oreos and ice cream and stuff, and we feel like garbage because we've been eating garbage. And so coming back, but kind of a long-winded answer, that probably the biggest thing that we can have an impact on our life is starting there, is getting that practice down.
Yeah, I think diet's it's a super important one. And I'll definitely include some links to the literature you referenced from these two doctors. In the diet piece, I think you just mentioned, hey, right, reading the label, making sure you can understand the ingredients, which there's not many food out there where I feel like you could come across that. Avoiding the boxed food or canned food, the packaged food seem to be two good rules. And then you also referenced two diets. I know for even me, someone who's somewhat well read on diet type things, there are so many fad style diets out there. Vegetarian, vegan, paleo, keto versus that. It can be overwhelming for, I think, the average person. Would you have maybe any other specific recommendations for a viewer who might be less informed, aside from the label piece and the processed foods, to maybe just help them take maybe one or two more steps to improve the diet side of things as part of this?
Yeah, it's really simple. Cut the sugar out of your diet, and that includes high fructose corn syrup, which is, in my opinion, poison. But cut the sugar out of your diet, because we see, because of the problems that sugar leads to, at the metabolic level, and how it affects us at the cellular level, without getting too deep into the nerdy science stuff. Dr. Beekman, who is now on the Jordan Peterson podcast, has a class. It's phenomenal. I would encourage everybody to listen to that, where he talks about the insulin rise in the body and how detrimental that is. Insulin rises every time glucose is released into the system, and so whether you eat it or whether it's released. So probably primarily the first thing is cut the sugar. And when I say, and probably what I should say is cut the sweet. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is cut the sugar, cut the corn syrup, the high fructose corn syrup, and cut the artificial 0-calorie sweeteners, because they're just as detrimental. You can't fool Mother Nature. You can't fool Mother Nature. And then second to that is cut the seed oils, the artificial oils. Again, you can say, well, corn oil is not artificial. It is, because anytime it takes a mountain of something to make a drop of something, that's artificial.
Right.
And so any of the seed oils, we now know the seed oils are incredibly detrimental at the neurological level. And so go back to what's natural, right? Again, you can't fool Mother Nature. Soybean oil, cottonseed oil, any of these seed oils, they're bad. Coconut oil is a fruit oil. That's good. It's full of MCTs, help with the ketones, raise the ketones. Avocado oil is great, but I mean, just grass-fed butter is. We're learning more and more as we've done looks at fighting cancer and whatnot, and getting into ketosis. Dr. Seafried is a fantastic resource if you want to look at cancer. And again, it goes back to metabolic efficiency, and metabolic inefficiency or metabolic dysfunction is what cancer is. It's metabolic dysfunction that's taking place. So and one of the primary ways that you can help that is clean up the diet. And then you've got this downstream effect, right, where you reduce the inflammation that's in the body, and then all of a sudden we feel great. And then, like, emotionally, we become more stable and we're more pleasant to be around. So our SQ or social are like, hey, that guy's nice to be around. I'm going to hang out with him more. And so now we get this nice positive feedback loop, because it's adding onto itself as it goes up, and we replace those negative patterns that are there. And it can all start with just I'm not saying this is the absolute cure to your ills. That
Right.
would be woefully incorrect. But this is a major step that anybody can have any effect on with that in their lives.
Feeling stressed, overwhelmed, or just plain out of sync? I've got something that could help. It's the HeartMath Institute's Coherence Monitor. This incredible tool helps you track and improve your heart rate variability, leading to enhanced emotional balance, increased focus, and improved overall well-being. I use it daily to stay grounded and perform at my best. All it takes is just a few minutes of a guided session to start to feel the difference. Visit the link in the show notes to reclaim your calm with HeartMath. Right. No, that totally makes sense. So it's like, it's not the only thing, but if it's wrong, it's going to be really hard to be holistically well and healthy. And I think if I could probably summarize this and make it, more simplistic, it sounds like what you're saying is if you have a high processed diet, particularly these artificial sweeteners, high fructose corn syrup, these types of things raise insulin in the body, which is basically an inflammatory marker, right? And so that could lead to a metabolic dysfunction that would potentially have a higher propensity to be a precursor for cancer or other forms of disease. And so the simplest thing that someone could do is cut those things out of their diet.
Yeah, I mean, like soy. I mean, soy anything is horrible for you. Whether that's the protein or the soybean oil is yeah. So if we remove these inflammatory markers that are in the body, right, it affects us. And anytime we're inflamed, take this to the nth degree. It's like, how social are we? How emotionally stable are we when we have the flu?
Yeah.
We're irritable. We don't want to eat. We want to be left alone. We want to lay in bed. We want the lights to be turned up. I mean, what does that sound like? Well, it sounds like deep depression, right?
Yeah.
Because what's happening is you're having this massive inflammatory response. That's an oversimplification, but people should be able to get the metaphor of what I'm driving is all of a sudden, and we're inducing that in ourselves at just a little bit every time that we eat stuff that is highly processed, garbage, really.
Right.
Every time you drink an energy drink, or any time that you gobble down, 5 pumps in your latte that is that artificial sweetener, you are causing an inflammatory response in the body, and there is a downstream effect that will happen that's detrimental, because you cannot fool Mother Nature. You can't.
Right. Right. And so say someone's taking these steps and they're cleaning up the diet piece, and now they're a little bit more agreeable to be around. And I guess, the social piece is such an important part. And when you bring up the social piece of kind of the friend piece being more likable and being around people, it kind of reminds me of the AVAR community. And so I was wondering if we could maybe segue there for a little bit. What recommendations would you have for someone who's maybe potentially feeling a little isolated and kind of going now on rebooting their health trajectory, trying to get things on the right track, to maybe take the next step towards creating a community or finding a community of kind of like-minded individuals that might be able to help them on their health journey?
Yeah. So, I'm not sure who it was that said it, but environment will overcome intention every time. And I think somebody else smart came along and said, if you're hanging out with 9 heroin users, I can tell you who the 10th one is going to be. And so, because that environment is going to overcome your intention. And so, how we break that down, right, is we have these, what we call the rings of relationships. And so you have this center ring that's you, right? Because you have a relationship with self, or at least I hope you do. And then your next ring out is your intimate relationships that you have with people around you. And how do we define an intimate relationship or a connected community? And that's AVAR, is what you had mentioned, which is authentic, vulnerable, accountable, and reciprocal. Authentic, vulnerable, accountable, reciprocal. And what that means is, that I can be those four things to the people that are around me without the fear or the worry of that being weaponized against me. So later on, somebody using some sarcastic measure or using it against me so that they can, boost themselves up in job or family or influence or whatever that is. And that is the definition of a safe space, right? That was hijacked by some of these other folks. But that safe space means that I can be authentic, vulnerable, and accountable. So authentic to who I am and what I'm thinking, vulnerable that builds depth in relationships because I can say what the feelings are that I'm having, and then accountable where it's like what it was my part in whatever issue that may have come along where I made a mistake. So accountable is not admittable. Accountable is me understanding where I was at on that lever arm that may have caused an issue in another relationship, including the relationship with self. And then reciprocal means that I am these same things with with these other people that are on that group, that ring of intimate people. And the reality is, if we look at the literature says that most people in the world have about five people that they would consider their connected community, about five. And so what I like to tell people is like Jesus had 12 and one of them betrayed him. And
Yeah.
so set your expectations there and then dial it back a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But at the center of that, remember, so you have that center ring that's self, and then the next ring out is your intimate, and then your next ring out is like your friends. So maybe they're authentic, but they're not really vulnerable, or maybe they're authentic and vulnerable, but they're not really reciprocal, or so they kind of got one toe in and one toe out, and that's okay because we just understand where those people exist in our life. That doesn't mean we go around and we start cutting everybody
Yeah.
away.
Right.
That's not the point of all of this. What it does is it allows us to say, hey, categorize where people are at that are in our life and go, okay, if I go to this person, so like if you're in my, after friends, you have like associates, right? And so if you're my associate, well, I don't go into a vulnerable conversation with you expecting that I'm going to get that reciprocal relationship back. I'm just going to leave that with anger or disappointment or resentment. Expectations build resentment because I'm not getting out of that relationship what I'd thought because you're not in that intimate ring that's there. That's where that is. And so people that as they begin in life, the key point to remember with all of this is AVAR, authentic, vulnerable, accountable, reciprocal, begins with that center ring,
Yeah.
which is self. I have to be authentic, vulnerable, and accountable with the mirror so that then when I get to the next ring out, my intimate relationships, I'm able and capable of being reciprocal to other people. So AVAR begins with Ava, which is the self.
Yeah. And so let's say someone now has begun to take a hard look at themselves, take accountability for the things that have happened in their life. They're stepping more into an authentic version of themselves. And now they're bringing that to their relationships. They've also cleaned up their diet. One of the elements you also mentioned was exercise. If someone's first taking their first step into, creating an exercise regimen, what would be a few nuggets or pieces of information that they should keep in mind from an exercise standpoint that you would recommend for someone out there?
So it's a great question. And I get asked that all the time. It's like, Jeff, what's the best way to exercise?
Yeah.
And I tell everybody the same answer. And it is the best exercise is the one that you are motivated to do. What is it that's inspiring you? Who is inspiring you? What is inspiring you? How are they inspiring you? Whatever that is the exercise you should do. And you probably remember the story from Rewilding where I mentioned my mom, right? This little old lady from from the mountains of North Carolina. And I was like, Mom, this is a younger Jeff years ago. And I was like, Mom, you're getting older. You need to exercise. You need to lift weights. And she looked at me with her Southern accent. And she's like, Jeffrey, I exercise every day. And I was like, Mom, that's great. You exercise every day. What are you doing? And I'm thinking like CrossFit and, deadlifting and stuff like that. And she's like, I work in the garden. And I was like, what, Mom? No, no. You got to go to the gym. You got to do this traditional exercise. And she was kind of like, you'll learn, and then years later, like I got my own garden. I started working in the garden and I was like, holy cow, my mom was onto something. This is hard exercise, pulling weeds and hoeing and shoveling and all. It was like, Jiminy Christmas. Stick with that, Mom. The best exercise is the one that gets you out to move. And what's really interesting, one of the things I've been working on was helping a couple of people as they're going through some working through some disease processes. And so I started looking at what's like, well, why? Everybody tells you exercise is healthy and exercise is important. Why? What is it about exercise that makes it so healthy? And it's not a simple or obvious answer. And is a really deep question. Why is exercise healthy? And then, and part of that is, I mean, if you start thinking about it, it's like, because exercise is far more than building big bones and muscles, right? Big
Yeah.
muscles and strong bones. And so now all of a sudden it's kind of the stuff that you do, because what happens when we exercise? We breathe, we
Yeah.
oxygenate the body, the blood moves, which then runs it through the filters of the body, like the liver and the fluids through the kidneys, which is now causing a filtration process, which is in fact a detoxification, as well as we begin to sweat, which is one of the best ways for the body to detoxify. And we strengthen the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a fascinating muscle. It is the primary pump of lymph from the lower body to the upper body, which is the lymph, in simple terms, is kind of the sewer system of the body where all that metabolic waste is getting flushed out of the body so that it can be cleansed. And then also breathing and oxygen and the stabilization of the upper body to the lower body. And these are just a few of the things. Movement is non-negotiable. As human beings, again, Mother Nature, you can't fool her. As human beings, we have to move. And if you don't believe that, put your arm in a sling and leave it there for a week and see what happens to your strength.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm going
So
through that right now.
you just went through that, right?
Yeah.
Because you
Yep.
tore your pec.
Yep.
Are you as strong now as you were? No, you
Nope.
have all these trickle down effects that are taking place because a muscle not used atrophies, because the body then goes on to other things for other metabolic processes, because the currency of the body is energy.
Right.
And we can either use our energy to build or use our energy to try and clean up the mess that we've done, either through injury or through diet or whatever that is. And so that's where the best movement is the one that motivates you to do it every single day.
Yeah. I love that. I love how you brought in the breath piece. I mean, dysfunctional breathing is such a big problem that people don't know about. Like, people don't know the right way to breathe, the right way to engage their diaphragm, and how that could even be a big part of keeping someone in a stress response, and how to regulate that breathing appropriately. If you're not engaging your diaphragm, you're potentially not stabilizing your core appropriately, right? And you go off and you start doing certain things, you could be at a higher risk for injury and things like that. And so it just goes back to your broader point of just this being a whole system where we can't isolate one thing and just address that and hope it corrects the entire problem. I mean, it is such a broader, complex thing. Our social engagements, our diet, our sleep, our breathing, our exercise, and all of it just ties in together to could really create a vicious cycle when one of those things are off, right? And how it impacts another piece, and then it just kind of creates a snowball effect.
Yeah, there's it's it like ties into sleep, right?
Yeah.
So I had one of my buddies that came to me. He's struggling with anxiety, and I was like, well, okay, and I'm a big fan of let's look at some of these other little things that are going on that maybe are not obvious and maybe affecting you. He's struggling with terrible anxiety. He was a veteran and stuff, so immediately you think, oh, veteran anxiety. Well, he must have PTSD or something. Started talking to him, and it was like, how are you sleeping? And he's like, oh, I have horrible sleep apnea. And I was like, oh, okay. And it just so happened that he had an aura ring.
Yeah.
So his oxygen saturation at night was 71%.
That is not good.
So for the listeners that aren't quite sure what that means, if you are at 71%, that is an emergency in the
Yeah.
hospital.
Yeah.
You are suffocating. And I was like, well, no kidding, you got anxiety. You're being suffocated every single night.
Yeah.
So we did a little simple procedure on him. And after the first time we did that, it takes 5 minutes to do this procedure. And it was a
Was it
little, it
deviate
was,
septum fix or?
it was a nasal facial. It's called the nasal facial
Mhm.
adjustment. And we did that. We did that on him. That next night, his O2 saturation was 87%. After his third one, he was 97% O2 sat,
Wow.
no CPAP. That's a miracle.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a miracle. Guess what happened to his anxiety? Did it fix his anxiety? No. But what did his anxiety do?
Right.
Brought it down to where then he had enough time because now he's getting sleep at night. The body is able to heal. Body heals when we sleep at night. Brain heals when we're in deep sleep. You remember that from my class.
Yeah.
And then what that allowed him to do was then it was like, oh, now because the brain fog has lessened because he's getting sleep, he can cognitively look at things and go, well, wait a minute. Diet. Okay, clean up my diet, get rid of the energy drinks. Now he's not so short fused because he's not getting a pillow, he's not getting strangled every single
Yeah.
night. And now all of a sudden we've got this nice chain of events where other things can get cleaned up all from just figuring out, hey man, you don't need more anxiety meds. You don't need this vacuum cleaner on your face. What you need is good sleep. How do we get you good sleep in a natural way that was there? Quick 5 minute little thing that we did, and boom. And it was now all of a sudden he's on the right path to fixing some of these other things. So there is no such thing as the evangelical cure where it's like
Yeah.
I be healed and you stand up out of the wheelchair and you're dancing the jig. That's a myth. That's not true. What there are is there's little bumps along the way, and if we can look at the root cause of what it is or try to figure out what that root cause is, get out of the mindset of band-aids,
Yeah.
right? Get out of that mindset and figure out, okay, why do you have anxiety? Well, okay. And then talking to them, taking time to talk to people, because 80% of the diagnosis from the patient will come right out of their own mouth.
Yeah.
You just got to be able to help guide them down the path and go, hey man, oh, so your sleep sucks. Okay. Well, let's look at X, Y, and Z. And this is so applicable to so many things in life. I mean, almost everything in life, right?
Yeah. For sure. Do you wake up with dry mouth or have you ever been told you snore? Did you know mouth breathing can disrupt your sleep, reduce oxygen absorption, and even contribute to snoring? It's time to optimize your breathing with MyoTape from the Oxygen Advantage. This simple, comfortable tape encourages nasal breathing, leading to deeper, more restful sleep, improved energy levels, and better overall health. I've noticed a huge difference since using it myself. Visit the link in the show notes and use code GOODVIBES to get an exclusive listener discount of 5% on all products from the Oxygen Advantage. Sleep better, breathe better with MyoTape. I want to circle back on something before we got into the health piece. You mentioned you had broken your back and that caused you to look into kind of to go outside the Western norms and look at some Eastern treatment options. And so can you kind of talk me through a little bit what happened with your back? What were some of those Eastern approaches that were a little bit different than what you had experienced, and how that kind of caused you to kind of dovetail and go down the rabbit hole of holistic health and the nurse practitioner piece?
Yeah, so I had broken L4, so lumbar spine 4, and you have this little pointy process off of the back. If you think about a vertebrae, you've got the circle piece that's called the vertebral body, and then there's the pointy spike piece that's called the process. Well, I broke the process off. And I'm pretty sure, I'm not exactly sure when I did that. You would think you would know, but under adrenaline, who knows, right?
Yeah.
So I had done that when I was in the military. And then later on, I ended up crushing the vertebral body, the round portion of L5. So I have got a compression fractures in L5. So what does that mean? Well, back pain for one, lucky me. And then also my legs would go completely numb every single night, multiple times a night. So I'd wake up and I would essentially be paralyzed. So you'd wake up to go pee, right? And which is another symptom of bad sleep if you're waking up multiple times to go pee. And I'd wake up and I'd have to sit there and concentrate on wiggling my toes. And my wife, it was actually my nephew who taught the yoga.
Yeah, yeah.
My nephew had hurt his back. As you remember his story, got run over by a car as a kid. And he found a chiropractor office that's close to us. So he went in there and he got relief. He came back, told me about it. And I was like, that sounds like some voodoo stuff to me, whatever. Well, my wife, she had hurt her back. And so she went in and she came back and she was like, these guys helped my back. You need to go check them out. And I was like, yeah, it sounds like some voodoo stuff. And so my wife, knowing me, was like, yeah, that's cool. I made an appointment for you. So I went in, and after my third appointment, I was walking behind my house and my legs weren't going numb like they normally do. And then I realized, wait a minute, my legs would go completely numb 2 or 3 times a night.
Wow.
And and my arms would go numb too because I have a neck issues from jumping out of airplanes. And then all of a sudden, these problems were starting to improve. And I was like, wait a minute, what is going on? And so I went to the clinic and I saw the doc that was there and I was like, what are you doing here? And he was like, well, I told you it's a fusion of Western, East meets West. So it's acupressure, but it's chiropractic, but it's fascial realignment, it's enthesis organ excitement. So it's a variety of things. And I was like, oh, and so I was like, this is amazing. This is helping me. And so I walked out of the office and I was checking out and they had a sign that was right there that said, hey, we're hiring, we're looking for help. And I had just graduated nursing school and I wasn't really interested in doing the quote unquote traditional hospital stuff. And I was like, hey, can I apply? And they were like, well, you've got to know anatomy and physiology. And I was like, I'm an RN. And they were like, fill out this piece of paper. And so I worked there to learn the technique, worked there for almost 3 years learning the technique. And now I help my friends and my family and with it. And it's been life-changing for me and for other people. But then that's just one of those things that I've come back and it was like that, I'll find truth wherever it exists. I don't care if it's from East Jabib, China or from the neighbor next door.
Right.
If it works, I'm going to bring that in and make it part of my repertoire, and then prove it out, and then share it with other people. And so that's exactly what I've done with the muscle work as well.
That's an incredible story. I'm glad you were able to find relief from the pain you were dealing with and the back issues from your time in service. And, I think it might be a good time to kind of circle back on that. I mean, your military service and reputation is extensive and extremely impressive. And so I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing with the audience a little bit more about your time in service and your military background.
Sure. So I did 28 years. I was a Green Beret. So I went through the Special Forces qualification course, started in 1988, ended in, what was that, March 89 or something. It's about a year-long course or something like that. And then I was a Green Beret, for the entire time, both active duty as well as National Guard, Reserve, whatever you want to call it. And then, so I was on the invasion of Iraq and was a team sergeant on that. And then while I was there, I jumped ship and went over to a counter-terrorist unit. And so I was part of a counter-terrorist force and for about 13 years. So I spent a ton of time in Iraq and Afghanistan, working over there and furthering the interests of the United States. And then, which is, somewhere in there is when I when I injured myself repeatedly, shoulder, knee, ankle, back, and neck. And then finished up there, I realized that it's like, hey, I've still got all my fingers and toes and most of my marbles. I'm throwing the dice a lot here. So, and I had 28 years. And so your body, it's not the years, but the miles. And I had a lot of miles on my body. I back pain, still have back pain, neck pain, still have neck pain, arms still go numb. But and so from there I went into business and helped start a couple of companies. Got Ready Man going on there. Helped get Black Rifle Coffee up and moving with Evan, and then Evan is he is 100% the energy that was behind that got that thing and hockey sticked it, and then and then I had Rats Tourniquet, where that I had invented the rats, and we were selling that thing all over the world. And then I was like, well, I want to do something else, and so sold everything off, and except for Ready Man, and went to nursing school. And and then when I was in nursing school, that's how ultimately I just finished my RN. And then since that time, I've continued and I've got my master's in nursing and as well as psychology. And now I'm in nurse practitioner school that's moving forward on that, and wrote several books in at Ready Man, and wrote several books since then for rewilding, to continue to help share the information and get that out and help folks. So I've written everything from military planning manuals that, speaking of sleep aids, if you need a sleep aid, that'll probably put you right to sleep, and then wrote a series of books, co-authored a series of books with one of my partners in Ready Man called Black Autumn, and that's a 9-book series that just got made into a movie called Homestead with Angel Studios, and they've done a phenomenal job so far. And then started writing books for rewilding, for the retreat, so that people had resources and stuff that they could take home and refer back to and share with their friends and family. We put out a ton of information during the retreat with all of the experiences that we do, so that we've got the tools, the tools, the techniques, and the practices that we do at the retreat, and then the books help people refer back to that, so there's a constant understanding of what it is that they're doing, so that they can then go out and spread the word. And so we were talking a little bit before the podcast. I'm almost done with I'm probably 75% done with the Summit Statement book, and then I'm about 80% done with the AVAR book. And so we've just had all of this stuff that is built up that's in the main workbook that you're familiar with, as we're chunking that stuff out, and those are kind of becoming their own books in and of itself. And so, yeah, it's an ongoing, really cool process to put all of this stuff together and just keep cranking on it.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of things, a lot of plates spinning, and certainly super impressive. And I'll include links to your website, both Mustang Medicine and Ready Man, and also for the books as well, and the movie. Homestead, is that on, like, people find that on Amazon, Netflix? Is
Angel
Yeah, okay.
Angel Studios.
Cool. I'll include links to that as well. Question about nervous system regulation, and obviously you mentioned your experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan, and how read in like, were you into some of these concepts in nervous system upregulation, downregulation, some of the physiological things? Like, were a lot of the things that you're talking about through Mustang and your work incorporated in things you did in the military? Are these all things and tools that you gained after your experiences and time in service?
So, great question. So, I shouldn't say a lot, a big chunk of the nervous system warm up, like what you learned at rewilding 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1 with both hands, and the cicada eye movement and the infinity sign eye movement and the breathing and whatnot were things that I actually stumbled upon. I was doing those already in the military, kind of the mindfulness technique that I walked you through, three things you're grateful for, something that you want, why do you want it, breathing that was leading up before that. So these were things that I was doing prior to every assault that we would go on. We get ready to get on a helicopter and go hit targets, or on a truck and go hit targets, or whatever. And so these were techniques or practices, really practices that I was doing prior to going out on any of these missions. And but I was doing it for a different reason.
Yeah.
I was pretty well versed in physiology and science prior to this, but nursing school is what really started bringing everything together for me. So a bunch of the stuff that the stuff that you had learned, I was practicing that prior to. So, for example, the horizontal eye movement back and forth like this helps balance the brain. It's very similar to EMDR. It's not EMDR, but it's very similar to EMDR. And there's a whole litany of reasons of why EMDR works. The super basic is, the eye movement, the cicada eye movement just balances the brain. And so anytime we can warm up the brain, right? We warm up before we go to the gym, but why don't we warm up the nervous system before we go into a hard conversation, or before we go into an interview, or before we take a test? And so what had happened was, it's that old saying of, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of training, right?
Yeah.
So here I am, like at the tender age of 50 years old, and I'm going through nursing school, and I'm getting my brain stretched and pulled in ways that it had not been stretched and pulled in decades. Where it's like I'm getting, okay, here's 60 drugs that you've got to memorize by Wednesday, because there's an exam. So nursing school's legit. It wasn't hard. Well, you fall to your level of training, right? So all of a sudden, before I'm taking these exams, I'm going through my little ritual that I would do. And then I just graduated nursing school, and I talked to Hugh, that we run the retreat together. And he asked me, it's like, hey, I'm thinking about doing a retreat. Do you want to come down? Will you teach? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And so that was my opportunity to do a self audit. And it hit me. It's like, why am I doing this little ritual before all my nursing exams? And then it was that epiphanal moment of, oh, wait a minute, I used to do that in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places. Why? Why am I doing that? It goes deeper than, like, well, I'm moving my eyes quickly left and right so that I can practice seeing targets or threats that are on the battlefield. What am I doing? And then all of a sudden, as I started to deep dive that, I realized that there was a psychological, physiological response that was taking place at the neurological level. And then all of a sudden, stuff really started to come together, because I'd always been a student of the stress response, always, since I can remember. Why do we shoot with a modified isosceles? Because that's what your body does under stress, right? So going back to my days of teaching people firearms, how do kids fight that haven't been trained in fighting, right? They're on the playground, you're looking at little kids, and then all of a sudden one of them figures out that they're going to engage in combat, mutual combat. What is the first thing the kid does? Shoves,
Yeah.
shoves. So the military had figured out, well, if the first thing you're going to do is shove, gain distance, lock the elbows, well, we're just going to put a gun in your hands. And then, because I had fought amateurly for about 15 years, all of a sudden these lessons started coming into play, and it was like, oh, this is the stress response. Why do we square off to the target? It's a stress response. Why do we lock our elbows? It's a stress response. Why do we tuck our chin? It's a stress response. Why do we focus on the target? It's a stress response. Well, if you understand the stress response, then all of a sudden you can start figuring out tools and techniques for that are best for fighting. But if you can understand that, then you can understand what the body is doing under stress, and you can come in to figure out ways to warm up the body so that you don't go into that pure fight or flight sympathetic response that's hitting your body. And so then what we did is we started looking at tools and techniques of how we can start to regulate that, because it's kind of exposure therapy, right? Getting into the cold water is a very difficult, stressful thing. It's exposure therapy. So
Right.
how do I regulate my nervous system while I'm being in a stressful environment? Breathing, counting my fingers, not getting away from the distraction, because distraction is actually outside of the regulation of the system. It's a false regulation. Whereas you think about when I'm fighting the saber-toothed tiger, I get that tunnel vision, I get that focus, hyper focus that's taking place. How do I convert that over to something that helps regulate the nervous system? Well, which is really is just hyper focused meditation, right? That the samurai were doing, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And so it's applying these techniques along the way to say, okay, now how do we compile all of these, put them in a book, so that we can then share them with other people so that they can regulate their nervous system too. And not some hokey hippie kind of way, but
Yeah.
in a scientific, rooted in the literature way of like, no, this works because we can look at the brain and the scans and say, no, we know this works because of X, Y, and Z. And so that's kind of a long-winded answer of that's why we're doing it, and that's how we came up with it.
I love that. I love that. Working hard but not seeing the muscle growth you want, taking collagen or protein might not be enough. You could be missing essential building blocks. That's why I'm excited to tell you about Body Health's Perfect Amino Tablets. These tablets provide all 8 essential amino acids in the perfect ratio for optimal muscle protein synthesis, recovery, and overall health. They're a game changer for anyone looking to build lean muscle mass, boost energy, and support healthy aging. Fuel your body with the best. Visit the Body Health link in the show notes and use code NEW20 for a 20% discount on your first order. Unlock your potential with Body Health. For the listener who's like really just intrigued by what you just said about getting into prepping the body before a big thing that might induce some stress, right? So maybe someone who's at a traditional corporate job and is thinking about stepping into like a meeting, they're about to give a presentation. What would be like your favorite maybe 3-minute or brief routine that they could do? What would be your one exercise we could take them through right now that would be a good pre-meeting presentation prep that they could do before they step into the boardroom, let's say?
Great question. And there's different permutations of what I'll go over right now. And I've taught this to, I don't know, like probably thousands of people at this point, right? And it's super simple. I didn't make this up, and you'll understand who made it up here when I finish. But I just tell people it's like, okay, you can close your eyes or soften your gaze, take a breath in, breathe through your nose, feel that air go through your nose. And the idea is try to hyper focus on that small molecule of air going up into the nose, the sinuses, tumbling around the turbinates, going down the throat, filling the bottom of the lungs, feeling the belly expand, then the chest. And then just with the gentle elasticity of the chest, letting that air go, either through the nose or through the mouth. Take another breath in, really try to smell something that's there. Feel that air enter, feel that go all the way down. And then this time, as it starts to go out, put the tongue slightly forward of the teeth and just gently hum. Next one is just in again, just super gentle. Just let the elasticity, don't force the exhale, just let it go. Then it's just to ask yourself 2 questions. The first question is, what do you want to get out of this next thing that you're doing? What do you want? Just continue to breathe while you ponder and marinate on that question. What do you want? And then once you have that fixed in your mind, the next question is, why do you want that? What do you want? Why do you want it? And take a big breath in through the nose. Just let it ease out through the nose or the mouth, whatever's more comfortable. 2 more of those, holding that in your mind. What do you want and why do you want it? And then when you finish, you can open your gaze, open your eyes, or normalize your gaze. And you've now done a big step towards calming the body.
I definitely feel more calm.
Yeah, because anytime that we start off calm, we're more balanced between the limbic and the prefrontal cortex, the executive function. And it's tremendously powerful. And you can go, there's several other things that we can add on top of that, but that's a super quick one
Yeah.
that you can do that brings you to the present, right? Because living in the future can be anxiety and living in the past can be depressive. But we want to, if we can bring ourselves to the present, where we can tell ourselves, you've got this, you've done this before, you're going to be able to get through this, you're going to get what you need out of what is going to happen. And then ready, set, go, away you go. It can be tremendously powerful. And everybody can add little things that are on that to make it even more personal and more powerful to you.
Yeah. That was awesome. Someone asked me this the other day as, we were talking about different things like this, different exercises, breathing wise, and they asked, how does humming calm? And I wasn't quite sure. I've heard it does have some, like, I guess, vagal stimulation there, but I was wondering if you knew about, like, what the science is behind the humming and why that does help with, like, relaxation.
Sure. Yeah. So you hit part of that. So anytime we hum, we're vibrating the throat. The vagus nerve runs down the side. The vagus nerve is kind of the highway of communication between the gut and the brain. Vagus means a bit like vagabond wandering. The vagus nerve is huge, huge, huge nerve that's in our body, but it's primarily responsible for the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest. And so if we can activate the vagus nerve, then it can still start to calm ourselves. The other thing that happens when you hum, so that's one thing. Then you also, when you hum, you start to activate other cranial nerves that come off. There's 12 pair of cranial nerves that come off of the brain. And the more of those that we can activate, the more balanced our brain is going to be because we're voluntarily activating those. So when you go to the doctor's office and he says, follow my finger, he's not checking your eyes. He is checking your eyes, but more importantly, he's checking your brain. When he says open your mouth and say ah, he's checking your brain. When he says shrug your shoulders, grab my fingers and squeeze, he's checking your brain. When he says, can you hear this? Or he's tugging on your ear or what? He's checking your brain. That's what he's checking. And so the more that we can balance the brain, the better able we are to bounce back with our resiliency after we have a stressful moment. So humming activates several of the 12 cranial nerves, not all of them, but several of them. You can get into the hypoglossal and the glossopharyngeal and the facial and the trigeminal. But the other thing that humming does is when we do it nasally, we release 15 times more nitric oxide.
Hmm.
What is nitric oxide? Nitric oxide is essential for the cellular processes in the body. And probably more to the point is it's a vasodilator. So anytime the vessels, the veins and the arteries in the body relax, the heart pressure, the blood pressure comes down, the heart rate slows, and it's a relaxation because we're able to relax. So think about your mom when she was cooking or whatnot, and she was sitting there and she was humming while she was doing it. These are things that we do instinctually as human beings that we're not quite sure of why we do it. But what we're doing is because we're in a calm atmosphere and we start humming, we actually increase the calm on the body. That now we've got this nice positive cyclical thing that's taking place that helps the body to relax and calm and reduce those cortisol levels that are in the body. That then the body can then look at ways to start cleansing itself and healing.
That's awesome. Jeff, we've talked about so many great things today, and I appreciate you sharing all your knowledge across a wide variety of topics. Out of curiosity, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that we haven't discussed that you think is worth mentioning or that you'd want to dive in a little bit deeper to?
I think the primary thing is we've discussed a lot of stuff, right? And there's a mountain more of information that's out there of what we can do. In the greatest piece of advice that I can tell people for me is just look at 1 degree of change. Just 1 degree. There's 360 degrees in a circle. Just change 1 degree. 1 degree. And if you can do that consistently, then you can build onto that. Don't try to make a 180 tomorrow or today or next, because it's not going to. It's the New Year's resolution, right? Everybody runs into the gym and gets their gym membership, and gyms love it because 80% of those people will come in one or two times, and then they fall off and then never come back to the gym. That's why the gym makes you sign up for a year, because they know that when they get you, 80% of you ain't going to show up to the gym until next January, and then you're going to sign that contract again, and then you're going to fall off because you're trying to do too much at one time. That's why the best exercise is the one that inspires you to do it, whether that's walking or CrossFit or gardening. It doesn't matter. What matters is you have to move. So the greatest piece of advice that I tell people is 1 degree of change, man.
Yeah.
Just change one little thing that's in your life for the better, and then focus on that win and build from there. That is the key to success.
Awesome. I think that's such practically good advice. Because it can be overwhelming when you're looking at the big picture, like, how am I going to do all these things? Just focus on that one thing that maybe is you're most excited about and take that one step. Could certainly start a chain reaction. One other thing I wanted to ask you, you mentioned your boys at the beginning of this podcast and the things they're doing with scouts. I think it seems like right now there's a lot of social angst for a variety of reasons, whether it's politically, geopolitically. What's some things you're trying to instill in your boys as you look towards the future that they're potentially going to be adults in? Advances in technology, AI. People seem to be scared about AI too. As you prepare them for whatever this new world is going to look like, because surely 10 years from now is not going to look like it does right now.
I think the biggest thing that I try and instill in my boys is do hard things. And when I say do hard things, that doesn't mean like you have to be like your dad, the Green Beret. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, when we do hard things, right? We call it hormetic practices, right? Hormesis, when we stress the cell gets stronger. And so when we do things that we don't like to do, when we do hard things, and we're trying to talk ourselves out of it, and we do it anyways, there's actually a part of our brain that grows, and it's called the anterior midcingulate cortex, and it actually grows and becomes stronger. And so when we do these things that are hard things, then other hard things become easier because that part of our brain has grown that allows us to do those things. Well, what does that mean? When you have to have that hard conversation with your boss or with your spouse or with your parents or with yourself, you're not going to shy off from that because you've already done these practices along the way, these techniques that hey, if I can get in 35-degree water, I can probably have a hard conversation with somebody, with myself or whoever that is. And so that's what I try to instill in my boys. It was fascinating. My son, my middle child, my son, It was his first time at scout camp, right? And he was going out on Wilderness Survival Merit Badge. And so Wilderness Survival Merit Badge, you have to go out from the camp and you have to build a shelter and you have to spend the night in the shelter. And you have a buddy.
Yep.
And so he's getting ready to go out and we're in the mountains and it gets a little chilly at night. And I'm like, hey, do you have a sweatshirt or something? And he goes, no, I forgot it. And I was like, well, it's going to get a little cold. Do you want me to go grab you my sweatshirt? Right. I'm being dad. And he looked at me and he goes, no, it's going to suck, but I'll just deal with it.
Yeah.
And so now coming from my 11-year-old, that was one of those proud dad moments where I was just like, yes, yes. And then I asked him when he came back and I was like, how was it? And he was like, it was cold, but I slept great. And I was like,
and you didn't have to push it upon him. He took it on himself. That's awesome.
Because the number one thing, right? It's all about resiliency, right? Yeah. When we get kicked in the teeth, when we get punched in the guts, how, it's like that Rocky thing. How hard can you get hit and keep coming forward? That is resiliency. Yeah. How hard can you get knocked down and then spring back? That is really just had this fascinating conversation with a psychologist. He is a psychologist, an operational psychologist for special operations. And I was like, what are you guys looking for now? And he's like, resiliency. Everybody has trauma. Yeah. Different levels of trauma, sure. Some really bad, he's like, primarily, we look at that, but the biggest thing we look at is, are they resilient? Were they able to bounce back after getting knocked down? Those are the people that we're looking for. Those are the people that we want, because life is full of disappointments. Yeah. And so the people that can bounce back after those disappointments, after those hard times, those are the ones, really, that's your buddy you want next to you in the foxhole, right? Sure. Because he get knocked down and he's going to keep going and he's not going to let you down. So what do I install in my kids? Do hard things. And they don't have to be Superman hard things, even just little things. Sometimes just making your bed in the morning is a Herculean effort. But just because you did that, now all of a sudden you're stronger because of that.
Yeah, you build some confidence. You got to win for the day, right? And even like we talked about earlier, right? Getting in the cold water, taking a cold shower, these little things, while maybe incorporating a mindfulness exercise, could kind of help create like this buffering effect where you're kind of building your stress response or your, I guess, capacity to manage just even day-to-day stresses, right? And so
you got it. Now you're weaving that stuff together. You got it, man. You got it.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, thanks so much. I appreciate you joining the show. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and the rest of your team, and greatly appreciate all the work you're doing with veterans and first responders and really, all sorts of people with different backgrounds in terms of just helping them better manage their emotions, incorporate some experiences like the heat therapy and the cold exposure, and to better manage physiological responses and everything in health and wellness. And it's been really, really a privilege to get to know you and know your team better. And I look forward to the continued conversations and time spent together.
Me too, man. Looking forward to it.
All right. Have a good one, Jeff.
You too.
Hey, thanks for tuning into the episode today. Hopefully you enjoyed the conversation with Jeff. I think his background is certainly super impressive. I just love seeing how he has involvement in so many different areas in his businesses and his personal life. I really admire the work that him and his team, Mustang Medicine, do. I love how they apply the science and the application of these different modalities and health practices and how they're actually contributing to helping regulate the system and help people live more happier and healthier lives. In our next episode, I'm going to be talking to someone who shares a little bit of Jeff's background just from across the pond. And so I'm going to be speaking with a Special Forces operator from the UK, is formerly an SAS officer who now is a bit of a Renaissance man himself and has involvement in a variety of businesses. But one of the things we'll be talking about is the work he does with something called Compass for Life, which helps individuals and organizations of all different types align on kind of a mission statement and goals, purpose, and values, and also the work that he's doing to help deliver that same program to underserved communities in the UK. And so I'm really excited for the chance to sit down with Floyd and share our conversation with the audience. If you could, please like, subscribe, or follow on whatever platform you're consuming today's show. Also, if you could, leave comments on what you thought about the episode. If there's anything that you'd also like for me to explore potentially in upcoming episodes, I would love to hear from you. Until next time, have a good one. Bye.